I think Babel was the book that made me realize that many of you within the big community have no reading comprehension whatsoever, because this book is made to make you uncomfortable as a white person, right? It is made to realize that you have way more privilege than you actually think, and also realize that in order for the oppressed to get equality or to get any sort of gratification and any sort of freedom from the oppression, you have to be uncomfortable. Like, you as a privileged person, white person, man, straight, whatever, you have to be uncomfortable with these changes, and you have to be aware that you will lose these privileges and that you will lose everything that makes you empowered within the community and within society. And this is exactly what Babel is meant to be given. But you guys, I don't think you guys understand the purpose of this book. Hello everyone, this is Darkest Tower Reads, and today I want to review Babel by R.F. Kuang. This book is insane. I love this book so much, and it was such a light bulb moment for me to read this book, just because obviously as a Spanish immigrant woman living in the UK, I felt really connected to Robin, but also at the same time it was quite an experience for me to learn some things or to understand some things within society and within my culture that I didn't realize before, which we will comment and discuss in the discussion and in the analysis. So let's start. Before we start with the review of the book, I have to give some disclaimers. So the first one is, if you haven't read the book yet and you want to read it and don't want spoilers, I recommend you scroll, just because we're going to be talking about the book. We're going to do a deep dive and I'm going to be telling some spoilers. So just FYI. The second disclaimer that I want to give is, if you haven't read the book and you want some spoilers, or you don't mind some spoilers, you just want to see a deep dive, some of the topics that we will be discussing are imperialism, racism, homophobia, and misogyny. So if you're uncomfortable with these topics, I also recommend you scroll. And then the third and last disclaimer that I want to give is that even though I am a Spanish immigrant woman living in the UK, which makes me some sort of relate to the characters, I also have to mention, and if you haven't seen me, I am a white woman, so I also live a life of a certain privilege, right? Obviously this is not something that makes me a bad person per se, but I also have to mention it because my perspective can come from privilege, and also taking into account that I'm Spanish, I think I know a thing or two about imperialism, right? Like, we talk about the British Empire, but we also have to mention about the horrible things that the Spanish Empire did to basically everyone in the world, right? So yeah, just take that into account. As always, starting with the summary, Babel happens in an alternative reality where magic does exist, and the magic system that they have in the book is basically using silver as a conductor for the magic, right? Which is the main point of the book. And this magic system specifically happens within what is lost within translation, as we call, right? So for example, let's say we have two words that mean basically the same in two different languages. This translation would give you some sort of power, right? So let's say, for example, the word house and the word casa for, like, in Spanish, this correlation would give you some sort of power, or would give you some sort of energy, right? So the main point of this magic system is that translating words or creating a pairing between these two words would give you some sort of extra energy that people use on the daily basis. So for example, for transportation, for agriculture, for machinery, anything in general. Now, the main story in general. So we follow an orphan from Canton later called Robin, who is adopted by Professor Lovell, a professor from one of the most prestigious universities in England, which is University of Oxford. But more specifically, he is a professor in the academy of translation called Babel. That is the main point of the book, right? And basically, as a Chinese immigrant, so he is moved to the UK by Professor Lobel, and is basically heavily tutored into English, into Mandarin, into classic languages as well, like Latin and Greek, in order for him to become a student within the bubble, within Bubble, right? Also, at the same time, we see the relationship that both Professor Lobo and Robin have, which is which is basically complicated at the main, like at the least, right? We see how there's quite a lot of abuse and abandonment towards Robin from Professor Lobo, and also this expectation that he has to fulfill, right? Which is entering into Bubble, becoming untranslated, just like Professor Lobo. Luckily, due to all the many hours and all the talent that Robin has for translation, he manages to get into Bubble, into this academy, and manages to become a student of translation, right? Which is his lifelong dream, or more so Professor Lobo's lifelong dream, right? And then we see how even during the first week of him becoming a student, we see how not only he manages to find other students like him and become friends with them, but also we see that Bubble, the academy itself, has a very deep, dark secret that is discovered and told to Robin by his lost half brother, who is Griffin. Obviously, at first, Robin doesn't want to believe in Griffin, or he doesn't fully understand why Bubble could have a dark secret when they're doing such good for the world, which is just basically creating connections within people that don't understand each other. But the more he studies and the more he understands and learns about Bubble, the more he realizes that Bubble is just a cover for the British Empire to become even more powerful within the world, and also to put pressure onto other countries in order to gain a capitalistic benefit, which is obviously the silver transportation in this world, right? Or just to control silver overall in order to have even more power and even more put more pressure onto other countries like India, like China, or Africa as well. We also see as well how Robin, who is literally half Chinese, right? Who is a person of color. We also see his journey within his experience as as someone who is racialized, and we see how he obviously tries to hide his Asianness, I would say, but then realizes and has the journey of understanding that this is something that he is oppressed about, and it's something that people, or the white people within the UK or the world in general, see that as something that is negative from him, and it's something that will never make him an equal citizen from the UK or from anywhere in the world. Now, there are three main topics that I want to talk about in this discussion. The first one is how we see Bubble as another character within the book, right? We see how Bubble deteriorates over time, but we also see the relationship that Bubble has with other characters, right? Especially with Robin. That is something that I find really interesting, and I haven't seen it mentioned in other reviews. The other point that I want to talk about is the way that we see a decline on Robin's psyche the more he understands the racial repercussions, the repercussions that his race has on him and on everyone else's behavior. And then related to the second point, I also want to talk about the journey of racial literacy within all the characters, not only Robin, right? I want to talk about the different journeys that everyone has within the book, or like the main characters basically, and how we realize that everyone has a different journey, but also at the same time how we as white people, we see this racial journey and how we fit into it without stepping on other people's toes. So the first point is Bubble as another character, right? As the fifth character, as I say. I think it is really interesting how we first see Bubble as this idyllic, paradisiac place, like this mecca for all these translators or everyone who enjoys academia in general, right? We see how this is the place to be, or this is the place to dream for, right? Because everyone has the same motivations as you. Everyone considers and is an equal for you, right? Even though you are unique, right? So, for example, for Robin, he is an Asian man or half Asian man who has had a really hard life and just views Bubble uh, as this mecca, as this thing that he has to get into because that is the one place that he will fit into, right? That is how I think Robin thinks about Bubble in general. But then the more we see, or the more we advance within the book or the story develops, we see how Bubble, even though it was at first like a paradise, it becomes like it slowly becomes a jail, and it slowly becomes what is the personal hell of all these students that were once promised that they would get equality because of their talents and because of them being Bubble students, right? We see how instead of a paradise, it's actually the main point why they are here and the main point why they are suffering, especially for Robin, right? Taking into account that Professor Lobo, his father, he literally, I think he just created him and he just had made sure that an Asian woman was pregnant in order to get this tool, right? To get Robin and to use him as a tool for the benefit of the British Empire, which I will talk on the third point. Now, when it comes to the second point, which is Robin's psyche, I think something really interesting that happens within the book is that Robin's mind is always looking for hope, right? Or at least that's how I view it. That is like we always see how, even though he is like he has suffered immensely because of the British Empire, because of his race, and because of his queerness that he doesn't fully accept as well. We see how he still looks for hope and he still looks for uh, um, to make sure that his friends and his family are happy, right? So we see when he first moves to England, we at least I think I saw how sad Robin was because his mom passed away, but then he realized that he had an opportunity to honor his culture and to honor his mom by uh, getting into Babel, right? Also, at the same time, he venerates Professor Lobo at some sort, like on some sort of level, because not only he is his savior, right, but also at the same time he is what he desires to be, right, which is a professor or a translator that has a lot of power and that lives within Babel. And then the more the story develops, we see how he feels lied to, right? Robin feels like everything is a lie. How even though he has this talent for Chinese, for the language, or he has these specific skills that the British Empire is looking for, they will never treat him like an equal, because at the end of the day, he's a person of color, right? He is a Chinese man who basically is between both worlds, but both worlds don't accept him, right? So we see the loss of hope and the loss of his mental stability because of everything that happens to him, and just him realizing that he will never be good enough, or he will never be free from the empire and from his oppression. Now, the third point that I want to talk about is the way of how rooted racism and imperialism is within us, right? So I see it as a way of our own privileges make us blind of other people's oppression, right? So, for example, the best example is Letty, right? So we see how even though she is a woman and she is oppressed in that way, like sort of way, we also see that she is privileged because she is white, right? And we see her siding with Bubble and siding with wasn't it, with the British Empire, because she still gets the privileges of being white, even though at the end of the day she will never be treated fairly or equally because she's a woman. She is lied to, or she is convinced by the empire and by other people like her, so white, by just basically telling on her friends and telling on these racialized people in order to gain some sort of benefit or some sort of privilege, right? She doesn't even understand or fully comprehend how much oppression, like race, like oppression because of race, actually affects people, because she has never experienced it, right? And that is something that we see on a daily basis, that I experience as well as a white person. Now, taking into account all the points that we have discussed, or all the points that we refer to, right, getting into the analysis, I think it's time for us just to concentrate all these points together and actually talk about the main point of the book, which is literally, it's literally how imperialism looks like on a daily basis and on our world right now, right? It's literally just a losing battle against the oppressed people in order to gain the scraps of the privilege, right? It's literally just literally a made up battle against oppressed, or like against people that are literally fighting for their lives in order to gain whatever the privilege give them, right? So for example, we see it with Letty, right? We see how even though she knows that she's oppressed, and even though she knows and she understands that her friends, her found family, are oppressed and are in way worse position than her, she doesn't care, because the only thing that she wants, or the only thing that she thinks in her brain, is that if she agrees, or like if she supports the empire, she will have some sort of gain, or she will have her only opportunity at actually being considered part of the privilege, or part of the group that she desires to be in, which is being a white man. Basically, that's how we see it, right? Now, the one thing that I also want to mention in the analysis is the fact that Babel is the perfect book for us to talk about racial literacy as well, which is, I don't know if that's how you call it here in England, but basically racial literacy is the journey that people go, or people of color go, when they first experience racism, or like along the journey that they go through along their lives whilst they experience this oppression because of race, right? So I have my notes here, so sorry if I am talking this way, just because I have some notes that are important that I want to mention. But yeah, basically there are some stages within this journey, and the first one obviously is ignorance, right? We see how Robin and other students, especially the ones that grew up, or like were born and grew up in those like their home countries, and then were transported, or were like emigrated towards the UK and into Babel, which is basically, at first they have the ignorance because they are not oppressed within their home countries, right? Like for example, Robin is like a special case because he's half Asian, half white. But for example, Rami or Victoire, they don't feel the oppression when they are in their own countries, because they are like everyone else, right? And then when they move into England, or when they first encounter white people, because at the end of the day, yeah, the ones that were like the vast majority of the people that were racist in this book are white people, so I'm just gonna say white people. But yeah, then they first experienced the first racist attacks, right? Which is basically Robin, like Professor Lovell's friends or colleagues, talking about how Robin is so well educated, or he is exotic because he is half Chinese, right? Or then we see the attacks towards Victoire and towards Rami because they are people of color, right? So the second tier is the first experience that actually shakes them to the core and makes them realize that, oh, hold on, there is something wrong with me, or I have received these attacks because I am different, because I am not white. And then obviously we have the first conflict, right? We have the third stage, which is the conflict, and it's just all these people, or the victim, understanding that there is something wrong with them, that something wrong with them, quote unquote, and that there's also something that makes them different, something that makes them unique, that people can use, or like that people view as a negative, as a weakness, right? This is how we see like how I view Robin, right? I see him as someone when he first comes into England and just like moves in with Professor Lovell. I see how he views his Asianness, or like him being Chinese, as a weakness, as something that he has to change, or something that he has to use in order to get the privilege of a white man, right? That's why he wants to move into Babel. That's why he wants to become like the person that has the most parents, or like that is why he has this internal huge pressure to be better, to be extraordinary, in order for them to be treated like an equal, like any other white person. Now, then we have the last two stages. So we have stage 4, which is the realization, which is what every person of color goes through within this journey. There is basically the realization that no matter what they do, no matter how great and excellent they are, they will always be oppressed, because they will always be a person of color, right? So this is something that happens like in our real life as well. This is something that happens every day, right? Like it's the realization that no matter how much effort, how much pressure they put onto themselves, or how excellent they are, they will always be treated as a victim, and they will always be oppressed. And then the last stage 5, is action, right? So we see how Robin, for example, with everyone else within Hermes society, they realize that it's like the only thing that they can do is act against it, right? Just rebel against the imperialism, against the racism, in order to literally fight, and or like literally fight to get the equality that they are looking for, right? This is something that we see every day, and that is something that this is not fiction, it's a reality for many people. Obviously I could talk about all the police brutality, all the racism that happens every day everywhere in the world. But yeah, it's just basically there is this stage where there's the action from the racialized people, or the people of color, in order to fight for these rights, or to fight for this equality that it should have been given to them anyways. Now, with this last stage, which is action, this is something that I want to put special effort into, because I think this is the main point of the book, and this is literally the core of anti-racism, and is I think this is something that people don't really understand. And I've been looking at reviews on Reddit, or in other community, like book community places, but it's just like people don't understand, or people literally say, oh, this is a little bit too much, like all the fights and all the mentions about racism and anti-racism. But like that is the main point of the book, right? Like the main point of the book is that at the end of the day, no matter what you do, or no matter how good you are, you will always be considered like the one thing that doesn't make you a white straight man, right? Like you will always be remembered, and you will always be classified as the oppressed, like as the oppressed, right? Me as a woman, as a queer woman, Robin as a Chinese man, Rami as a Indian man, like someone, like there's always something that will make you oppressed, right? And like it doesn't matter how good you are, or how well you behave within a society that is against you, you will have to fight for your rights, and you will always have to make people uncomfortable in order to get scrubs, and in order for you to get true equality, right? This is what we see with Luigi Mangione's case, right? We see how he had to do something so extreme for everyone to start talking about how fucked up the insurance policy situation in America is, right? Like we always need to, like as oppressed people, or like as oppressed groups or victims, we always need to fight tooth and nail for scrubs, right? We see with the suffragettes, for example. We see within the feminist movement in Korea or in Japan. Like, we will always have to fight no matter what. And the best way to fight and to get what we deserve, what is long overdue, is by making people uncomfortable, by making people understand that there are going to be consequences if we don't get that. Now, the other thing that I also want to mention, and that I also think is extremely important in this book, is Letty as a figure, right? Obviously, I have mentioned that she is a white woman. So even though she is oppressed in some sort of way, she is also privileged, and she's also the oppressor in some sort of way. And I think, for me personally, it was very interesting to relate to her, because obviously as a white woman, I was put into that position because I naturally related to her. She experiences the misogyny, but also at the same time she gets the privilege of being white, right? Which is something that I have experienced all my life. At the end of the day, I am quite pale for a Spanish woman. Also, at the same time, when I moved to England, no one expected me to be an immigrant, because when you look at me, you see how fucking pale I am. You could expect, like, there would be no reason for someone to suspect that I wasn't, right? At the end of the day, like, it is what it is. Also, I can't tan, so the more, like, I even look more English. But yeah, basically, like, I was put into Letty's position, into understanding that even though I am oppressed, I like, in another way, I'm also the oppressor, right? And I think like some people within the big community were really upset about Letty, or like about Letty's situation, but it's just like, it just makes complete sense. Like, that was what was supposed to do, right? In the sense of Letty's role in this book is to make white people, or to make white women understand that we can be the oppressors, and that we are still privileged in some sort of way, right? Because, like, if you talk about Victoria's role, right, like, she is a black woman, so she is literally double oppressed, right? So she will never get any sort of privileges that I could get as a white woman, or that Letty could get as a white person, right? So that's the main point. Like, the main point of Letty as a character, and the main point of her, like, becoming a traitor, is for us white people to understand that at the end of the day, we can also be the oppressors, right? Even though we are oppressed, or we are victims because we're women, we are still the oppressors because we're white, because we have that privilege. This is the main point for Letty, right? The main point is that, like, even if we are oppressed in some sort of way, we can also be the oppressor. So the only thing that we can do is A, understand our privilege, B, understand how much of our behavior is actually just bias, right? Or are just behaviors that we have naturalized because of the way that we grew, or our culture. But also at the same time, we can only lift other people up, right? So let's say Letty, for example, the action, or the correct action that she should have done, would be support the other people of color, or her friends, for example, Rami, Victoire, and everything. Use her privilege in order to support other people. And at the end of the day, no matter how much we lift people up, at the end of the day, we have to give power to the people, right? And we have to become secondary characters in order to lift people up. We need to give the space. Like, we can't just be talking for them, right? We need to give the space for them to talk, and for them to just to make people, other people like us, aware, right? And this is something that I found myself years ago just like conflicting as well. Like, I was very conflicted, because I couldn't understand how me as a woman, I could be oppressed and the oppressor at the same time, right? I was like, oh, no matter what I do in this society, I'm still a woman, so therefore I'm still a victim, right? But also, there, at the end of the day, I am also white, so, which makes me part of the problem in some sort of way. So just like, the only thing that I can do, or the only thing that we as white women, or we as oppressors and victims at the same time, the only thing that we can do is understand that this is something that happens, like this is just a cognitive dissonance that we have internally at the end of the day. Two, realize that people that are oppressed in other ways, that they also can be in that situation, and then we can only support each other in order to make sure that the places where I can lift other people up. So for example, the way that I can use my white privilege as a way to lift the stories of people of color, or like to ensure and contact, like to ensure that people of color are listened and heard of and support in any way that I can. But also at the same time, I can ask for people that have been or that are in another way oppressed, that they can help us or me as a white, as a woman, just to help and support me in that way. So at the end of the day, the only thing that we can do, and the only point of this book, is that even though we are oppressed, we can lift people, like we can lift ourselves up, and the only way that we will be able to do it is by supporting each other. Okay, that was a lot. But yeah, just as a quick recap, just two main conclusions. The first one is, please read Babel. This is, oh my god, I am so obsessed with this book. I'm also obsessed with R.F. Kuang. Please support her in any way possible. Read her books. I can assure you that I'm gonna read the next, like the following books that she has, or like any of the books that she has published already. And then the second conclusion is, if the action that victims of oppression are doing is making you uncomfortable, is making you scared, or is making you worried about your own life and your own privileges, it is a good thing, because that means that this action is meaningful. And two, you should check your privileges and you should check yourself and understand that why these things are making you uncomfortable, and why do you think that you deserve the privileges that they don't have. I'm just saying. Now, this is all for today. Thank you so much for watching my video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to discuss Bubble or this journey in general, please make sure that you comment down below, or we can talk together on my social media. And also, I hope you read Bubble or you read anything from R.F. Kuang. Please support her. She is incredible. I love her. 10 out of 10. And yeah, thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you next week. Bye guys. Thank you.